The Big Lebowski was more than a stoner comedy. It was a myth in sweats, a film noir that lost its own story, meandered off in a bathrobe, and returned with a white Russian. Beneath the mustaches and bowling balls, it tanked big when it came out. But the film, like its legendary title character, would not die. The dude abided, and eventually so did the movie. It was quirky, chaotic, messy, and strangely philosophical. A movie about nothing and yet somehow about everything. And at its heart was a strange truth. The dude was real, and he was walking around Hollywood the whole time. That's only one of the many bizarre and wonderful facts about the making of this film. To grasp why The Big Lebowski lasts, you must peer beyond the box office numbers, past the joke on the surface, and into the layers of happenstance, spontaneity, and myth that hold the entire affair together. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel Star Vault TV, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. The man who inspired the dude was not an invented sketch conjured up during some late-night writing session. He was Jeff Dowd, a shaggy, big-eyed movie hustler who had once assisted the Coen brothers in getting their first feature film, Blood Simple, to the screens. Dowd was a hustler, but he was more than just that. He was a member of a radical activist movement in the 1960s known as the Seattle Seven, yes, the same crew Walter rants about during his bowling alley breakdown. But what lingered with the Coens wasn't Dowd's politics. It was his energy, his bizarre charm. He showed up to key meetings wearing flip-flops, white Russians during the day, mumbling incoherently, and introduced himself proudly as the dude. When the Coens began constructing their roving anti-hero, they didn't invent him out of thin air. They just hit record on Jeff Dowd's life. And Dowd latched onto it. While so many real people resent their fictional counterparts, he adored it. He showed up at Lebowski fests, signed autographs, and even joked about the bamboozlement. For Dowd, the movie wasn't quoting him, it was that he had been quoting himself for years. But The Big Lebowski was more than a white Russian and bowling alley trope. Underneath the bathrobe, it was a surgically precise, structural experiment. The Coens constructed the film in the style of a Raymond Chandler detective novel. Red herrings stacked up on top of each other, mysteries got solved into dead ends, and the audience was pulled through a noir plot structure that never really came to an end. Only instead of a hard-boiled detective, we had the dude, a man without urgency, without plan, and without any intention of fixing anything. The genius wasn't in the mystery being solved, it was that the dude himself was the mystery, a passive presence floating through a meaningless world. He wasn't a broken man, he was ungraspable, nearly zen. That reserved subversion of genre expectations is one of the things that makes the film ageless. And yet, casting might have taken the entire endeavor in a whole different direction. The Coens initially dreamed up Marlon Brando as the elder Lebowski, the blusterous, wheelchair-using patriarch. Just picture Brando, with his Shakespearean heft, booming about bums and briefcases. Naturally, it never occurred. Brando was in declining health and not interested in strong-arming parts anymore. In retrospect, the missed opportunity was a blessing. The part fell to David Huddleston, who embraced the ridiculous over the dramatic. His bombastic pronouncements, "The bums will always lose," succeeded not because they were spoken in godlike authority, but because they emanated from an empty blowhard. In a movie about people acting like they were someone they weren't, the elder Lebowski didn't need a giant. He needed a phony. If casting created the elder Lebowski, it also set the dude. Jeff Bridges didn't merely act the character. He wore him, literally. The sweater? His. The sunglasses? His. The jelly sandals? Borrowed from his own dresser. In each pre-shot briefing, Bridges would ask the Coens if the dude had rolled a joint before showing up. If they assured him that he had, he would rub his eyes, muss his hair, and slump into the character. He wasn't method acting, he was channeling. Bridges was at ease playing the dude, and that ease became the key to the film. Even the strangest scenes in the film became legend. When Walter bludgeons a teenager with a crowbar, the original dialogue was too foul for television. In the censored version, the dub provided us with "Do you see what happens, Larry, when you meet a stranger in the Alps?" It was so ridiculous and abnormal that it became more than parody. Years later, even indie singer Phoebe Bridgers named her debut album Stranger in the Alps, testifying that the most bizarre mishaps often leave the greatest impression. And there was Jesus, not the Messiah, but the purple-dressed bowling libertine portrayed by John Turturro. On screen, he had only a few minutes, but Turturro constructed the whole character himself. The campy swagger, the lick-on-the-ball ritual, the finger rolls. He even invented a disturbing backstory. Jesus was a convicted sex offender. The Coens loved it, not because it was spelled out, but because it explained the character's desperate need for performance and attention. It was a hidden layer that made Jesus memorable even in his brief appearances. The casting of Big Lebowski followed a similar path. The part might have been offered to a larger star. There were rumors of Cameron Diaz or even Charlize Theron being considered, but instead Tara Reid, who was then a fairly obscure actress, received the role. Reid gambled on her audition, reading that infamous line about sexual favors without hesitation, and the Coens saw in her their ideal powder keg. Bunny wasn't merely comic relief, she was the wild spark that set the dude's surreal journey rolling. Not all actors grasped their roles at once. Julianne Moore, playing the quirky Maud, was perplexed by the character's dreamlike feminist and art-directed lines. She admitted her confusion to the Coens, who just advised her not to try to make sense of it, just act as if she did. That liberated her. Moore embracing the oddness, delivering Maud's lines as baffling performance art, made her both alien and indelible. The Coens were similarly unyielding in challenging their audience. At test screenings, there was always one scene that made the audiences uncomfortably shift in their seats. The discovery of the severed toenail polish still applied. Producers pleaded with the brothers to dial it back, but they would not. The sickening gross-out wasn't intended to offend for its own sake. It represented the surreal danger that undercut the humor. It was icky because it was intended to be. Even the soundtrack had its mythology. Getting the Rolling Stones' Dead Flowers for the credits appeared out of the question. The rights owner, Alan Klein, wanted an astronomical fee of $150,000, but he sat down to watch the movie, heard the dude grumble, "I hate the Eagles, man," and burst out laughing. Klein hated the Eagles and loved the jab so much that he granted the Coens the song gratis. What might have been a bureaucratic headache became a cult legend feud solved by one throwaway remark. Walter Sobchak, the gun-wielding bowling traditionalist, was also born out of real life. Some of him was borrowed from screenwriter John Milius, a right-wing provocateur with a fascination for firearms. The rest was borrowed from a Vietnam War veteran friend of John Goodman's, who growled rules at waiters and approached casual conversation with political argumentation intensity. Goodman made both influences his own so completely that even Milius himself subsequently chuckled and admitted, "Yeah, that's me." But this is the insane twist. Not once in the movie is Walter's actual service in Vietnam ever definitively established. His war tales are loose and conflicting, leaving intact the chance that he fabricated his trauma to aggrandize his own self-image. Donnie, by contrast, was played by Steve Buscemi. Donnie only speaks in a whisper, and when he does, Walter shoots him down. Buscemi was originally disturbed by the way the character felt invisible, but the Coens offered the justification that this was the idea. Donnie was the guy nobody ever heard, until he just wasn't there anymore. His death, nearly glossed over in the confusion, is the movie's emotional knockout. For once, Walter and the dude must cease and desist, listen, and give the silence some acknowledgement. Where Donnie's disappearance provided the film with its tragedy, Sam Elliott's Stranger provided it with its soul. Added late in production, the Stranger was conceived as a mythical narrator, a cowpoke inserted from an entirely different genre. He doesn't alter the plot. He doesn't fix anything. But when he utters, "The dude abides," he distills the film's odd philosophy into one indelible line. The Coens themselves adopted the absurdity even in advertising. Following the release of the film, they provided one of their longest interviews not to Rolling Stone or Variety, but to Floor Covering Weekly, a trade publication, on carpets. Why? Because of one line, that rug really tied the room together. To the Coens, the most minute detail was worth taking seriously if it tickled them. Even the settings were iconic. Jackie Treehorn's mansion was not a set, it was the legendary Sheets Goldstein house in Los Angeles, an architectural work of art created by a Frank Lloyd Wright protege. The house, with its concrete austerity and absence of right angles,